other distinguished representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the Secretary General. I thank the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his presence. I would also like to thank Mr. Andrzej Duda, President of the Republic of Poland, as well as the ministers here present for their kind consent to take part in and to speak during today's thematic briefing. I should like to take this opportunity to congratulate President Duda upon the beginning of the non-permanent membership of Poland at the Security Council. I look forward to fruitful cooperation. I also congratulate Côte d'Ivoire, Kuwait, the Netherlands, Peru, Equatorial Guinea, who this year became non-permanent members of the Security Council. I cherish the hope that we shall cooperate fruitfully within the framework of this critical body of the United Nations. The Security Council shall now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2018/4, a letter dated 2 January 2018 from the permanent representative of Kazakhstan to the United Nations, addressed to the Secretary General, transmitting a concept note on the item under consideration. With this, I wish to give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Your Excellency, President Nursultan Nazarbayev of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to join you for this timely debate, and I thank the Republic of Kazakhstan for convening it. Kazakhstan has a proud tradition of support for a world free of weapons of mass destruction and for the global non-proliferation regime. I thank President Nazarbayev for his personal leadership on this vital issue. Kazakhstan's contribution includes rejecting the possession of nuclear weapons and founding the International Day Against Nuclear Tests. This Council, too, is instrumental in preventing the spread and use of weapons of mass destruction. As the Council declared in 1992 at its first Head of State level summit on the issue, the proliferation of all weapons of mass destruction constitutes a threat to international peace and security. Confidence-building measures, such as Resolutions 255 in 1968 and 984 in 1995, on negative security assurances, helped pave the way respectively to the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and to its indefinite extension. However, despite the Council's efforts, the threat posed by weapons of mass destruction remains and indeed seems to be gathering force. Global anxieties about nuclear weapons are the highest since the Cold War. The situation on the Korean Peninsula is the most tense and dangerous peace and security challenge in the world today. I remain deeply concerned over the growing risk of military confrontation and the unimaginable consequences that would result. I welcome the firm decisions the Security Council has taken in response to nuclear tests and ballistic missile launches by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in defiance of Security Council resolutions. They must be fully implemented. The Council's unity also creates the opportunity for diplomatic engagement. As I said to the General Assembly this week, I welcome the reopening of inter-Korean communication channels, especially military to military. This is critical to lower the risk of miscalculation or misunderstanding and to reduce tensions. I'm also encouraged by the decision of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to participate in the upcoming Winter Olympics in the Republic of Korea. We need to build on these small signs of hope and expand diplomatic efforts to achieve the peaceful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in the context of regional security. Mr. President, elsewhere, trust on nuclear and other issues between the United States and the Russian Federation continues to ebb. Vital strategic arms reduction measures established during and after the Cold War are under threat. After the expiration of New START in 2021, there seems to be no appetite to negotiate new nuclear arms arsenal reduction treaties. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on the Iranian nuclear program is also being questioned. The multilateral agreement, which is in the interest of the Iranian people and the international community at large, should be preserved. In the Syrian conflict, the use of chemical weapons seriously challenges the global taboo against these weapons of mass destruction. If the use of chemical weapons in Syria is once again determined, the international community needs to find an appropriate way to identify those responsible and hold them to account. Without such an avenue, we are allowing the use of chemical weapons to take place with impunity, and I hope the Council can return to unity on this issue. Mr. President, the threats posed by weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery are taking place in the environment of increasing military budgets and the over-accumulation of weapons. And they are coupled with a serious growth in regional tensions. In such a geopolitical context, confidence-building measures that support arms control, non-proliferation, and the elimination of weapons of mass destruction are extremely important. By increasing understanding of others' positions and allowing information sharing on, for example, military budgets, strategic outlooks, and troop movements, they can help to decrease tension and avert conflict. In the case of the Biological Weapons Convention, which does not have a formal verification mechanism, a system of confidence-building measures has contributed to enhancing transparency. These measures are intended, and I quote, to prevent or reduce the occurrence of ambiguities, doubts, and suspicions, end of quote. Through the provision of annual information on national biodefense programs, high-containment laboratories, legislative framework, and vaccine production. Unfortunately, participation has been less than satisfactory, with fewer than half of all state parties regularly providing information. For the measures to be truly effective, states must take full advantage of their benefits. Mr. President, trust is essential, but confidence can be undermined by bellicose rhetoric, confrontational approaches, the absence of communication channels, and inflexible positions. Engaging in disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control measures are, in and of themselves, confidence-building. By removing the threat posed by weapons, arms control, and non-proliferation mechanisms, provide the breathing space for dialogue, boost confidence in parties' intentions, and lay the groundwork for building the trust necessary to end conflicts. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the groundbreaking arms control agreements of the late 1980s and early 1990s that contributed to the peaceful end in the Cold War. It is therefore alarming to see historic accords such as the Treaty on Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces and the Open Skies Treaty under question. Effective verification mechanisms have proven to be some of the most successful and enduring types of confidence-building measures. From the groundbreaking verification protocols of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty to the invaluable work undertaken by the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, verification builds confidence. In this context, I welcome the establishment of a group of governmental experts on nuclear disarmament verification. Effective verification requires support for those entities tasked with monitoring and verification to ensure they can fulfill their duties in an impartial and professional manner. It also requires understanding that non-proliferation challenges are not static. The measures we use to overcome them need to evolve in tandem with the implementation of disarmament commitments. Mr. President, I believe the United Nations can play a central role in assisting member states to develop, augment, and support confidence-building measures. The United Nations position as an honest broker allows us to act as a venue in which all parties can engage in dialogue, whether for the development of new norms and values or to resolve existing disputes and promote understanding. Going forward, the Security Council in particular can provide leadership by demonstrating unity and continue to highlight the importance of dialogue and diplomacy as an essential means for building confidence. A measure that all member states can undertake is the universal and complete implementation of all disarmament and non-proliferation obligations. I appreciate that due to the resource and other constraints, the implementation of disarmament, arms control and non-proliferation commitments can prove difficult for some member states. I therefore call on all states able to do so to provide the necessary capacity-building assistance. Mr. President, the development of practical confidence-building measures is an important means of achieving the United Nations mandate to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. However, they are not an end in themselves. Preventing, mitigating, and resolving conflict requires comprehensive political solutions that include dialogue and negotiations, and in cases involving weapons of mass destruction, verifiable disarmament and non-proliferation. I believe the current international situation underscores the need to reframe and modernize long-standing disarmament and non-proliferation priorities. Deepening divisions and persistent stagnation in these fields are exacerbating international tensions and creating new dangers. As a contribution to reversing these trends, I intend to explore opportunities to generate new direction and impetus for the global disarmament agenda, and I look forward to engaging with stakeholders on these issues in the months ahead. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your briefing and for your detailed support for the agenda of today. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan. I shall begin in our state language.
Distinguished Secretary General, distinguished Council members, ladies and gentlemen, I am glad to welcome you at this thematic briefing. We consider Kazakhstan's election as a non-permanent member and today's presidency in the UN Security Council as a sign of trust of the international community to our country and our peaceful policy. And I am saying this to the representatives of the members that have supported our position. As the first state from Central Asia in this noble mission, we have become the voice of the countries of our region in this important body of the global organization. A year has passed since Kazakhstan started its term in the United Nations Security Council. We have strived to be proactive, constructive, and objective in tackling pressing issues present on the agenda of the Council. While chairing committees on Afghanistan and Taliban, ISIS and Daesh, Al-Qaeda and Somali Eritrea, we have been making our contribution to their productive proceedings. I am grateful to all Council members for their continued cooperation.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, today's meeting is the flagship event of Kazakhstan's presidency at the United Nations Security Council, and it is specifically dedicated to one of the most pressing topics on the contemporary global agenda. Confidence-building measures aimed at achieving the goals of peace and security play a key role in conflict prevention and the resolution of pressing global issues. From the 47th session of the United Nations General Assembly, I proposed the establishment of a regional structure for security and confidence-building measures in Asia. Following assiduous diplomatic efforts, this mechanism was established. Presently, the CICA is successfully operating and bringing together 26 states of the region. A quarter of a century has elapsed, and now once again I address the United Nations on behalf of Kazakhstan, now as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. However, it behooves me to note that the question of increasing mutual confidence both amongst some countries and at the global level remains urgent and acute and is becoming all the more relevant. Confidence-building measures should remain on the agenda as the most important element in the maintenance of the global security architecture and the strengthening of peace throughout the planet. Why is this so? Firstly, confidence-building measures have justified themselves throughout the process of preventing the threat of total destruction during the second half of the 21st century, when humankind stood at the brink of a major large-scale war. The United Nations Charter states that our main goal is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Over a quarter of a century, at the United Nations, my country has made a sweeping transition from an owner of the world's fourth largest nuclear arsenal to a leader in global nonproliferation, at the same time closing the largest nuclear training site, Semipalatinsk. The renunciation of nuclear weapons and nuclear power status was our deliberate and sincere choice of voluntary initiative supported by all of the people of Kazakhstan, and this was duly appreciated by the international community. Presently, our country is party to all fundamental international treaties in the arena of nuclear security, and we have legally enshrined our nuclear weapons-free status. Secondly, the atmosphere of mutual trust may facilitate the creation of a new model for international cooperation. A shining example and practical embodiment of such cooperation is the opening last year of the IAEA Low-Enriched Uranium Bank. With this, Kazakhstan has made yet another contribution towards strengthening the non-proliferation regime and the safe use of uranium for peaceful purposes. Thirdly, the nuclear-free status of Kazakhstan may serve as an example and as practical guidance for other countries. And I state this based on our own example. We have both built and strengthened our independent country. We have achieved its high international standing specifically by renouncing nuclear weapons and securing non-aggression safeguards from nuclear powers. We call upon all other states to follow our example. We called upon Iran to do so. Now we call upon North Korea to do so. There are many nuclear weapons throughout the world, which constitutes a threat, and the way to ward this off is through confidence. Fourthly, current possibilities of science and technological progress and the realities of globalization make the task of WMD nonproliferation a matter of survival for humanity. The increase in the number of countries possessing WMDs is posing a risk of nuclear, chemical, biological, and radiological weapons falling into the hands of destructive forces. The present-day legal framework for nuclear security has failed to prevent the expansion of the nuclear power club in the late 20th century. I believe that such a much necessary need for nuclear nonproliferation, underpinned by the Non-Proliferation Treaty, shall require profound shifts in mentality and new multilateral political solutions. As a confidence-building measure in non-proliferation, I would propose the following measures to enhance confidence in non-proliferation. First, I find it necessary to make withdrawal from the NPT more difficult. The example of North Korea may prompt a similar action from other countries with ambitions to possess nuclear weapons. We are aware of the importance presently of threshold countries. Without casting doubt on the NPT, I propose we consider the possibility of crafting a special United Nations Security Council resolution setting forth clear implications for those countries who breach the treaty, and these would include sanctions measures and other coercive measures. We have seen the necessity of this. The achievement of such some countries, for example, India and Pakistan, despite the NPT, continue to seek to possess nuclear weapons. Second, we must develop a truly effective mechanism for applying stringent measures against acquisition and proliferation of WMDs. Such multilateral treaties shall be approved by certain United Nations Security Council resolutions as a main measure to remove incentives for the possession of WMDs. I deem it necessary to develop a legally binding system of safeguards by nuclear powers to those states who would voluntarily renounce the possession of nuclear weapons, as well as to the states with non-nuclear status. This is fair, and this can be done without great expenditure. Third, success or failure of the process of modernization of the global security system directly hinges on the international community's ability to surmount militaristic anachronisms. We should leave behind the division of countries into military blocs or alliances whose existence becomes both provocative and meaningless in the 21st century. And this is specifically where we need trust amongst states, trust which is waning with each year presently. I have put forward my vision of global anti-military measures in the manifesto entitled The World 21st Century. This proposes initiatives facilitating the creation of a nuclear weapon-free world by the United Nations centenary. If the international community supports this, I do believe that this goal is attainable. Fourth, we certainly must revive political trust and systematic dialogue. A sound example of this can stem from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the deal on the nuclear program in Iran, which has demonstrated the success of multilateral diplomacy in the sphere of nonproliferation. This has become a practical example in resolving the most complicated issues through negotiations. This agreement was made possible thanks to the atmosphere of trust building, which is where Kazakhstan has made a contribution as well through our example. And this showed what we have achieved, having merited the trust of the international community. I hope for further successful implementation of the JCPOA despite of the fact that certain complications have arisen recently vis-a-vis fulfillment of their obligations by some of the parties to this agreement. As you are aware, 2 days ago, I met with the President of the United States, Mr. Trump. We discussed this issue, and an understanding arose that in principle, we can surmount this issue. A similar constructive approach, in our view, may be applied also to the matter of settlement of North Korea's nuclear problem. It is known that current developments on the Korean Peninsula demonstrate profound contradictions. The world is deeply concerned. This issue can be resolved through the restoration of trust among the United States, Russia, and the People's Republic of China. And this, too, is what we discussed recently at the White House. I believe that the positions here converged. Without the participation together with the United States, of Russia, and China, it would be difficult for us to resolve this issue. In this regard, we call upon the stakeholders as expeditiously and constructively as possible to achieve a settlement to the North Korean issue. We advocate the nuclear fives granting security guarantees to the DPRK as a key prerequisite for the establishment of an atmosphere of trust for Pyongyang to return to the negotiating table. Kazakhstan stands ready to engage in mediation, providing our platform for negotiations should the need arise among stakeholders. Confidence-building measures are more relevant than ever before for the Middle East, where tragic events are currently unfolding. The conflict in Syria is reverberating with negative implications far beyond the region. Here it is important to note that it is specifically mutual trust that has constituted a basis for the dialogue at the Astana platform, which is contributing to the extent that it can to the Syrian peace settlement process whilst shoring up Geneva negotiations. 7 such talks were held in Astana, and as participants have stated, these were all successful and helped to address the issues. Fifth, one of the most effective measures in combating the proliferation of WMDs, in our view, is the establishment of nuclear weapons-free zones. This, too, constitutes a form of collective trust taking shape. This was done in Central Asia, and my hope is that nuclear powers will follow suit. It is important to pursue efforts in creating a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. I call upon stakeholders to resume their efforts and hope that the persistent differences among some countries will be surmounted. Sixth, presently, there is a risk of a new wave of an arms race with the use of scientific achievements. In this regard, the international community should strengthen control over the creation and proliferation of new military and information technologies. I believe that confidence-building measures are also necessary in forging common approaches towards prevention of the militarization of outer space. All of these issues, which I referenced in my view, merit a standalone meeting of the United Nations, and the discussion of the issues that have arisen, and a convergence of views of states is important, as is the restoration of trust amongst states. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, today's realities are such that many conflicts can be prevented and effectively settled only provided there be mutual understanding and mutual trust amongst the world's nuclear powers. They bear the greatest responsibility before humankind to prevent a nuclear disaster. Largest nuclear powers in particular should stand at the forefront of the struggle for a nuclear weapon-free world and lead by example in WMD reduction. However, this does not mean that other countries should stand aside as if little depends upon them. On the other hand, if the great nuclear powers state that they will remain nuclear powers and strengthen their capacities, and if they are told that others are prevented from doing so, then I believe this will backfire. So, in this regard, we must work together. The international community is a single body. Through its diversity, and pluralism, it is strengthened. It can survive when there's a balance and harmony amongst the nations and peoples living on our planet. For this very reason, we must jointly strive to achieve a safer world, a more equitable world order based upon the rule of international law. Undoubtedly, in this matter, a special role and a historic mission lies with the United Nations Security Council. I am convinced that in the 21st century, humankind is capable of treading a dignified path to a world free from the threat of weapons of mass destruction. I believe that trust, willpower, and intelligence of the international community, multiplied by the energy of collective action, will prevent our planet from plunging into the abyss of global catastrophe. Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. I now resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, the President of Poland, Andrzej Duda.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking the Kazakh presidency for organizing this high-level debate on such an important and relevant topic. It shows your long-lasting commitment to the non-proliferation efforts. Kazakhstan's credibility in this matter is reinforced by the fact that it is one of the very few countries which abandoned the nuclear path. I remember reading remarks by President Nazarbayev in which he stressed, "It was the best decision I had ever done for my young country." And Kazakhstan's continued engagement in this regard has been demonstrated many times ever since. Let me only mention recent establishment of law-enriched uranium bank. Not only does it constitute a major step towards promotion of nuclear safety, but it promotes transparency and builds confidence among peace-loving nations. I also want to thank President Nazarbayev personally for inviting me to this debate. It's my first time, and most definitely not the last, visit to the UN Security Council as President of the Republic of Poland. I'm here because the issue under consideration is very much connected to Poland's priorities in the Security Council, that is, supporting the existing and building new international law instruments to mitigate unlawful and aggressive behavior of some members of the international community. Let me stress, not only aggression, but also any attempt to build aggressive capabilities should always be treated as a violation of international norms, because in the end, it leads to the erosion of the noble idea of peaceful coexistence of states. The very essence of solidarity and lawfulness at the international level is a peaceful cooperation between all states. That is why it is so important to further develop legal instruments in international relations, as well as the ability to enforce them. It also applies to the issue of nuclear non-proliferation. As members of the Security Council, we are committed to treating it with all the seriousness it deserves. Mr. President, non-proliferation and disarmament, despite having a developed and established legal and treaty architecture, still remains an unfinished project. At its core, the Non-Proliferation Treaty can be seen as having a mixed record. I see three problems here. Firstly, there is no requirement for a country to join the treaty, and those which do join have a potential easy way out. They can withdraw from it with no more than 3 months' notice. Secondly, within the treaty, there is no framework of sanctions regime to guard against the treaty violations. And thirdly, though the treaty allows for its signatories to pursue a nuclear strategy for peaceful purposes, the inspections procedure is based on voluntary cooperation and mutual trust. But as we have seen throughout history, the world is not run by the gentleman's agreement rule. In fact, world affairs are too often run by people who are anything but gentlemen. Recent developments in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, broken assurances provided for Ukraine by Budapest Memorandum, controversies over the joint comprehensive plan for action with Iran, as well as threats posed by non-state actors, have all shown that non-proliferation agenda is today even more topical than ever. And it does not only apply to military nuclear capabilities. Chemical and biological weapons or ballistic missile proliferation are just as important. With reference to chemical weapons, Poland finds it unacceptable that we are still confronted with continued use of this type of arms. It's the responsibility of the Security Council to continue conveying a strong message to the world on this matter. Chemical weapons were used on a number of occasions since the 1960s by Egypt in Yemen, in the 1980s by Iraq against Iran, and recently in Syria, but with no serious consequences for the side which used them, and that's the problem. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, currently, however, the most worrisome situation seems to be the one in the Korean Peninsula, where provocative actions taken by the North Korean regime not only destabilize the whole region, but undermine the whole non-proliferation effort. Stockpiling of chemical weapons, the development of military nuclear capabilities, and ballistic missile programs, as well as provocative tests of those weapons, are a clear violation of international law in general and on the respective UN security resolutions in particular. Such actions show that the policy of aggression and confrontation overshadows the policy of open dialogue and trust. What is worse, they also show, creating a dangerous precedent, that running a policy based on the law of force and not the force of law sadly can be effective and can go unpunished. The way in which we solve the crisis will have a significant impact on the future of the entire global non-proliferation architecture. I believe that the intensified efforts undertaken together by the international community will bring about a political solution and will result in the stabilization of the situation in the region. It's especially crucial today, as the 2018 Winter Olympics will soon begin in South Korea. This event should be celebrated as in a safe surroundings and allow for spectacular sport competition in the atmosphere of peace and friendship between all nations. Mr. President, Excellencies, Poland has been a long-standing and active supporter of strengthening non-proliferation and disarmament norms and principles. We are now chairing two important initiatives: the second preparatory committee for the 2020 review conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, as well as the Hague Code of Conduct Against Ballistic Missile Proliferation, a chairmanship we inherited from Kazakhstan in 2017. Despite the concerns raised over the NPT, we believe it is the only real instrument which brings us closer to the world without nuclear weapons. The implementation of the treaty is subject to review every 5 years. Poland, as its current guardian, has the intention to focus on maintaining its credibility as well as creating the environment for a mutually respect, transparent and all-inclusive dialogue. Bearing in mind that in 2020 review conference will mark the 50th anniversary of NPT's entry into force, we would very much appreciate the support of the Security Council and the United Nations in efforts to making it our common success. Equally significant to global and regional security and stability is the proliferation of ballistic missiles, including those capable of delivering weapons of mass destruction. Unfortunately, the record of efforts aimed at curbing it is short. This is why the importance of control mechanism has become even greater. For 15 years since the establishment of the Hague Code of Conduct Against Ballistic Missile Proliferation has been promoting transparency and confidence-building measures. As its chair, Poland wishes to follow up by supporting the full implementation of the code and strengthening its relationship with the United Nations as reflected in the UN General Assembly Resolution 5991 of 3rd December 2004. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I would like again to express my gratitude for the Kazakh presidency for selecting such important issue as the focus of today's debate. Poland will continue its commitment to making our world safe from nuclear threats. As we are all aware, the devastating aftermath of use of weapons of mass destruction would transgress all borders. That is why we should work closely within the UN community to make sure it never happens. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the President of Poland, Andrzej Duda, for his detailed statement on this issue. I now give the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Kuwait, Mr. Sheikh Sabah Khalid Al Sabah.
Mr. President, I would like to begin on behalf of the government and people of the government of Kuwait, congratulate you and congratulate the Brotherly Republic of Kazakhstan on your presidency of the Security Council this month. The choice of the subject for our debate today during the first open high-level meeting of 2018 under the agenda item entitled Non-Proliferation of Weapons of Mass Destruction Confidence-Building Measures. This choice is extremely important for the international community and for the members of the Security Council who wish to guard the world from weapons of mass destruction for stability and peace and security in the world. We give you the full support of Kuwait in accomplishing your tasks and in fulfilling your mandate. I can only thank the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his very valuable briefing, which illustrates the need to promote confidence-building measures as part of prevention of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in order to put an end to the threat which they represent. The disarmament and non-proliferation efforts are central to preserving international peace and security. The state of Kuwait attaches particular importance to all issues relating to disarmament, non-proliferation, and to the peaceful use of nuclear energy. This is part of the 3 pillars of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I would like to reiterate the unmovable position of Kuwait with regard to the maintenance of international peace and security, as well as the issues of disarmament, and particularly our commitment to the NPT, as well as the documents adopted by the Review Conference in 1995, 2000, and 2010. And that on the basis of our commitment to respect international treaties and our conviction that they are useful. The ideal means of removing the danger of nuclear weapons and guarantee that they will not proliferate is to completely remove nuclear weapons as quickly as possible. We call upon the nuclear weapon states to dismantle them and to respect their commitments in accordance with Article 6 of the NPT. And to guarantee the respect of this treaty at international level. Once again, this is key to international security, and it's the very basis of the current disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. When we look at the international initiatives and the creation of nuclear weapons-free zones, we must remember the challenges that the area of the zone of the Middle East faces with regard to creating that kind of zone. The Middle East, unfortunately, is still a flagrant example of threats facing the non-proliferation system, in addition to the selectivity of the Security Council in how it deals with these threats. It's not surprising, therefore, that the region is really feeling disappointed, particularly in the Arab countries, because of the ongoing failure to implement commitments with regard to the creation of a nuclear weapons-free zone and free of other weapons of mass destruction. This is particularly clear in the resolution relating to the Middle East adopted during the Review Conference of State Parties to the NPT of 1995, as well as the working group of the Review Conference of 2010. These documents are still valid until the goal and objectives are achieved. The responsibility to implement this resolution is a responsibility of all member states to the treaties, particularly the nuclear states, and particularly the three states that deposited the treaty and that presented the resolution on the Middle East as part of the unlimited renewal of the treaty. Our debate today reaffirms once again how earnestly the Security Council addresses threats and the dangers represented by weapons of mass destruction. This is not limited to the announcement of preventive measures through Resolution 1540, but also addresses future threats if these measures fail. Any attack or use of these deadly weapons will have consequences and will lead to destruction that cannot possibly be repeated. The Council therefore unanimously adopted Resolution 2325 of 2016, reaffirming that the proliferation of nuclear, chemical and biological weapons is a danger for international peace and security. And there is a roadmap for the future work of states and the 1540 committee, and that goes to 2021. We hope that this subsidiary body of the Security Council will become a permanent committee and not a temporary committee because of its importance in preventing terrorists from acquiring nuclear, chemical and biological weapons. Moreover, we once again condemn the use of chemical weapons in Syria, use that was confirmed by international reports. We are following with concern the ongoing allegations of the use of these prohibited weapons by the warring parties. The inability of the Security Council to preserve the international mechanism to determine which party has used these weapons will mean that those responsible for these crimes will enjoy impunity. We have to come up with alternative solutions and a future new mechanism that will guarantee that these criminals are brought to account and held responsible. We must stress that criminals will not go unpunished, and we would call upon the United Nations and also the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons through the fact-finding mission to carry out investigations on allegations of the use of chemical weapons in Syria. Finally, Mr. President, I would like to reiterate the unmovable position and of principle of the State of Kuwait with regard to issues of non-proliferation and our commitment to continue to cooperate to bring about a world that is free of weapons of mass destruction. We look forward to the day when together we will be able to once and for all completely put an end to nuclear accidents. There are no borders to those nuclear accidents. They affect all parts of the world. Our world no longer needs any proof of these kinds of things. And we would call upon all states to preserve international peace and security, and we call upon all states who constantly express their commitment and respect for the Charter of the United Nations to take clear, honest measures to achieve the goal of creating a world free of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Mr. Foreign Minister, Deputy Prime Minister of Kuwait, for your statement. I shall now like to give the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Viktorovich Lavrov. Distinguished Mr. President, distinguished Mr. Secretary General, the Russian Federation welcomes the initiative of the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, to conduct a special Security Council meeting on the issue of non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, building confidence-building measures. This is especially relevant given that on 1 July this year marks the 50th anniversary since the opening to signing of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which undergirds the international system for nuclear non-proliferation. We are convinced that the risks and threats in this realm which we face presently need to be dealt with specifically on the basis of this treaty with a balanced approach to its three pillars, namely non-proliferation, disarmament, and the peaceful use of nuclear power. Unfortunately, at the 50th anniversary, we are seeing major difficulties which are liable to make more difficult the review cycle, which is to conclude with the review conference in 2020. One of the main aims of the cycle is confirmation of the commitment to the goals of this treaty, obligations thereunder, as well as its strengthening on the basis of the plan of action, which was adopted during the 2010 review conference. To that end, all countries must shed an unwillingness to heed each other's views, which was made so flagrantly clear in 2015. Then, inter alia, an illusory and dangerous trend prevailed, with compelling of nuclear powers to abandon the nuclear arsenals that they had without accounting for their security interests and without accounting for strategic realities. This approach was infiltrated with the push-through crafting of and opening for signing of a treaty to ban nuclear weapons. Russia does not intend to join the treaty banning nuclear weapons. We are of the view that a full eradication of nuclear weapons is only possible in the context of comprehensive and full disarmament with a condition of equitable, equal, indivisible security being provided for all, including for those possessing nuclear weapons, as is stipulated under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The provisions in what has been presented for signing, that is a treaty to ban nuclear weapons, these provisions are far from these principles. They disregard the importance of accounting for the whole range of factors which presently impact strategic stability. It also provokes profound disagreements amongst members of the international community. It is liable to have a destabilizing effect on the non-proliferation regime. I should like to stress, we embrace the goal of building a nuclear weapons-free world. However, to achieve this, unilateral methods upon which the treaty is based should be avoided. Prospects for the present-day review cycle cast doubt on the importance of creation in the Middle East, zones free of nuclear and other forms of weapons of mass destruction and means of delivery. We believe that the convening of a conference to ban to create a WMD-free zone in the Middle East remains relevant for our part. We shall continue to facilitate progress in this process. The guarantee for success, in our view, is consideration of this issue within the broader context of regional security. Specific Russian considerations in this regard are well known for amongst all stakeholders, and they remain in force. Another important issue is the state regarding the treaty to ban nuclear tests. As a principled supporter of the CTBT, we call upon all stakeholders who determine its entry into force to carry through with their signing and ratification, as was repeatedly promised. At the same time, it is important to ensure continuation of a moratorium on any nuclear explosions. Amongst primary specific measures to ensure nuclear non-proliferation, it is important to bring together efforts to sustainably implement the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to resolve the situation around the Iranian nuclear program. The Security Council has supported the JCPOA. It unanimously adopted the relevant resolution 2231. Thereby, the Council bears responsibility for implementation thereof. Iran steadfastly complies with its obligations, and this is consistently confirmed by the IAEA. The overwhelming majority of the international community acknowledges that the JCPOA is making a tangible contribution towards strengthening the non-proliferation regime, towards the maintenance of international peace and security. We cannot, for the benefit of political agendas of certain countries, abandon a genuine achievement of international diplomacy, which was a crowning achievement of the efforts not only participants in the agreement itself, but also of other stakeholders, including Kazakhstan, who have supported this initiative. Clearly, the failure of the JCPOA, especially as a result of one of the parties of the 5+1, would be an alarming message for the entire international security architecture, including the prospects of dealing with the nuclear problem on the Korean Peninsula. We reaffirm the relevance of what was proposed by Russia and China, namely a roadmap for an exclusively peaceful settlement to this issue. We are gravely concerned by the growing threat of chemical terrorism in the Middle East, specifically on the territory of Iraq and Syria. Militants not only are using toxic chemicals, but they also have their own technological and manufacturing capacities to synthesize full-fledged military toxic substances. They've established far-reaching channels for access to their precursors. We must bear in mind the real risks of chemical terrorism spilling over beyond the Middle East, taking into account the significant amounts with foreign fighters amongst extremists. Those in Syria and Iraq and abroad, those terrorists have already gained access and skills for the manufacture and use of chemical weapons. Over the course of many years, over the past 3 years at least, we've repeatedly proposed the adoption of a Security Council resolution, or at least a presidential statement, to condemn specific instances of chemical terrorism in Syria and Iraq. Unfortunately, all of our proposals were consistently met with obstinate resistance by our Western colleagues, some Western colleagues, who prefer to turn a blind eye to instances of use and even manufacture of chemical terrorists, and they are advancing baseless accusations against Damascus. It is unacceptable to capitalize on the importance of preventing WMDs for achievement of narrow geopolitical agendas. This is what we saw with the intervention in Iraq, with the trumped-up pretexts 15 years ago. Recently, we have borne witness to persistent attempts to manipulate in initiatives of what has concluded its work, the Joint Investigative Mechanism. This is lamentable, and we reaffirm our commitment to building a new mechanism for the investigation into chemical weapons in Syria on the basis of the principles which fully reflect the norms under the Chemical Weapons Convention. We call upon all states to also comply with obligations which stem from what was adopted in 2004, namely Security Council Resolution 1540. This calls upon all states to adopt some measures to prevent non-state actors gaining access, non-state actors including, of course, terrorists, gaining access to weapons of mass destruction and other related material. The relevance of this resolution, Resolution 1540, was reaffirmed by the Security Council following the comprehensive review of its implementation held in 2016. The Council must deliver a strong response to breaches of Resolution 1540, be it in Syria, in Iraq, or elsewhere, especially with respect to instances of other actors gaining access to weapons of mass destruction. Russia supports efforts to establish and bolster national, regional, and sub-regional capacity to deal with these challenges. Recently in Kaliningrad, under the auspices of the OSCE and the Office of Disarmament Affairs of the United Nations, we held a special seminar on the practical aspects of implementation of Resolution 1540. Last year, during our chairmanship of the OSCE Forum on Cooperation for Security, we organized a special meeting on this issue. We further welcome the consensus-based approval 3 months ago of a decision of the OPCW Executive Council to prevent the threats of non-state actors' use of chemical weapons. This, in our view, is a step in the right direction. In order to boost the effectiveness of multilateral cooperation to prevent WMD proliferation and threats of such weapons falling into the hands of terrorist groups and the hands of other non-state actors, Russia proposed the crafting of a new legally binding instrument, an international convention to combat acts of chemical and biological terrorism. The draft convention has been presented by us during the disarmament conference in Geneva. We call for prompt commencement, beginning of talks for its approval. Mr. President, Ms. Secretary General, the present-day state of affairs in non-proliferation disarmament urgently requires a joint quest for ways to surmount these contradictions, whilst cautiously approaching demonstrations of effectiveness of cooperation and strengthening international legal basis. And this must be done on the basis of the interest of all states being taken into account. Our hope is that today's Security Council initiative and that the initiative advanced by the President of Kazakhstan will help us to achieve this goal. Thank you for your attention. I thank the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation for his statement. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in connection with the planned bilateral meetings, I am now compelled to leave this meeting, and I will be replaced here by the Foreign Minister of Kazakhstan, Kairat Abdrakhmalov. In conclusion, I should like to genuinely thank the Secretary General, thank all of those who spoke, and all of those heads of agencies, foreign ministers, of our neighbors, President Duda, Minister Lavrov, and all others. I thank you for your interest, which you have demonstrated in the very valuable proposals that have been voiced. Thank you, and I wish you all the very best to our Council in the struggle for peace on earth. Thank you.